cosmic consciousness, extraterrestrials and UFOs, sacred geometry, ancient civilizations, spiritual connection, the quantum universe. All of these topics and so much more with your host, Seb Tuck, on Alien Spirit with Seb.
Hello, welcome to Alien Spirit. I'm Seb. Kathleen Marden's interest in UFOs and ET contact began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle Betty and Barney Hill had a UFO abduction in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. As a family member, Kathleen gained firsthand knowledge of Betty's and Barney's UFO encounter on the day they arrived home. As the trustee of Betty's estate, Kathleen has selected files from Betty's personal archives for a permanent collection at the Milne Special Collections Library at the University of New Hampshire. Since 1991, Kathleen has volunteered for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, in various positions, including Director of Field Investigator Training and founder and director of MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team, and was awarded MUFON's Researcher of the Year. She has appeared as an on-camera commentator on 55 TV and video productions, and you've probably seen her on Ancient Aliens, which is just one of them. She speaks at conferences and gives interviews globally. Did you know that Kathleen was a nuts and bolts investigator? We will discuss her journey and transformation from that approach to her current perspective of multidimensional consciousness playing a role in ET contact. Kathleen is involved with 3 studies, researching 5,000 experiencers. She is presently working on the Marden-Barton Survey of Religious Belief and Extraterrestrial Life, which is available on her website. And I urge you to take the survey. You don't have to be an experiencer. Non-experiencers are welcome. Kathy has written 6 books. Science Was Wrong, which she wrote with Stanton Friedman. Forbidden Knowledge. There's 2 editions of this. I have both of them. Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, also written with Stanton. The Alien Abduction Files that she wrote with Denise Stoner. Extraterrestrial Contact, I love this cover, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. And the classic book, and one that everyone should have captured, The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. And there's 2 editions of this too. This is the 60th anniversary edition. This is one of those books that I consider the Bible book for ufologists and for anyone interested in ET contact. For those of you who know me, know that Kathleen is very important in my life. She is the very first person that I came out to regarding my decades of ET contact that I was hiding and that was causing me much distress. And Kathy changed my life. We've known each other for 6 years. She's mentored me for 6 years, and she's done nothing but just showered me with kindness and respect and care. And it is my great pleasure to have Kathleen Marden as my guest. Welcome, Kathleen Marden.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Well, Kathy, let's start with where you grew up and what were you interested in as a little girl or as a young lady?
Okay. Well, I grew up in southern New Hampshire. I was born in Portsmouth on the seacoast. And then when I was 2 years old, I moved to Kingston, which was across the street from my grandparents' farm. My parents built a house there. So that was a big move, and I had a little brother who was coming along shortly thereafter. Growing up on a farm was pretty interesting. And it could be boring at times. I remember as a little tiny girl, long hours of just sitting on the front steps, hoping that a car would drive by, hoping for human contact. And to entertain myself, I used to go to my grandfather's barn. And if one of the barn cats had a litter of kittens, I would select a kitten and I would take it home and I would train it. I would. It would have been a feral cat and very frightened, and so I tamed it so that I could hold it and pet it and dress it in doll clothing and put it in with the dolls and push it around in a carriage. Did that kind of thing when I was little. Then as I grew old enough to climb trees, I climbed a lot of trees. There were no girls in my neighborhood, so I played with the boys. So I was pretty rough and ready, climbing trees and going to the farm pond and looking at the frog eggs and watching the tadpoles hatch, and really developed an interest in science as a result of growing up there. The farm had chickens and cows. My mother milked the cow. I should say there was a beef cow and a milk cow. She milked the milk cow and taught me about the pasteurization process. So I learned about that as well. So I learned quite a lot growing up. And when I entered school, it was a new experience for me. I loved books. I just loved books. And as I grew older, we were able to walk to the town library in the afternoon. And my favorite books were written by, it was the Nancy Drew mystery series. And, I think that sort of is consistent with the level of curiosity that I've always had about topics that I'm interested in. But I did not become interested in UFOs until September of 1961. And you can show that slide.
Which one?
Me standing by Niagara Falls.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So there I was that summer. This is in July. I was there with my Aunt Betty and Barney's, or my Aunt Betty's sister and her husband and my cousin. And I had a wonderful time with Maid of the Mist and putting on the raincoats and going under the falls and all of those exciting things that you can do. And I loved it so much that I was showing my photographs to Betty and Barney once I had them developed, probably from my Brownie camera. And Barney turned to Betty and said, do you think you'd like to go there sometime? And Betty said, sure, she'd like to go. So he hatched a plan that he would take her to Niagara Falls during her week-long vacation from her job as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She worked in child welfare and adoption. So he had gone to work the South Boston Postal Annex and decided to ask for a few days off to take Betty on this surprise trip. So that was the beginning of my interest in UFOs, because before I knew it, they had returned home from that vacation.
Yeah, it's all your fault.
Gotten off the school bus in the afternoon, and Betty was on the telephone with my mother. And my mother was very concerned. Betty was telling her that the flying saucer that she and Barney had seen the previous evening had come so close to them that she was afraid they'd been contaminated. When they arrived home, they felt dirty, they felt clammy, they had taken long showers. She had told Barney not to bring any of the luggage or the picnic cooler into the house because she feared contamination. And she wanted my mother to call our neighbor, who was a physicist, and to ask the physicist what she should do. They ended up taking the clothes in, and they threw away all of the food that they had. And, from there on, I wanted to get to their house. I wanted to hear the story myself. And within a couple of days, I was down there seeing the spots on the car that had not been there the day before their arrival home, only after the craft made these code-like buzzing sounds on the trunk of the vehicle and left those spots that caused a compass needle to spin and spin, indicating a magnetic field. So that was really exciting. And to get to hear from my Aunt Betty the experience that she had had while my father was speaking with Barney, who was anticipating a telephone call from Pease Air Force Base. They'd already made a report, but the Pease was going to call back for additional information.
Well, first of all, I'm really impressed with Betty's demeanor, and that she was so logical that she thought of this in a scientific way right away.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was concerned for her own safety and health, and for Barney's as well.
So what were their demeanors like when you arrived a couple days later?
Well, Betty took us into the kitchen, my two brothers, my mother, and I, and she just explained what they had observed, that this flying saucer, as they called them then, came so close to them that she was afraid they'd been contaminated. It was within 100 feet of the vehicle. Barney had gotten out of the car. He'd looked up and saw figures that were dressed in black, shiny uniforms through the windows of the craft. They heard those buzzing sounds. They had some memories of what had occurred, but after the buzzing sounds, they found themselves on a whole new highway. They were on the interstate highway. They had been in Lincoln, New Hampshire on Route 3. But after those buzzing sounds, they started to feel a vibration in the car and a tingling sensation that passed through their bodies. In fact, Betty felt of the metal on the car to see if she'd receive an electric shock, but she didn't. Barney compared the sound to a tuning fork having been dropped. So these buzzing sounds that clearly left those magnetic spots on the back of the vehicle. That was really exciting. Betty's watch had stopped running, and so had Barney's, and they never ran again. They arrived home later than they had anticipated. The binocular strap was broken. Betty's dress had been torn. I didn't see it that day. She'd already put it into her closet to be repaired. And Barney, his demeanor was different than usual. He was just very, very interested in us children. He was happy-go-lucky, and we had a great time with him. And that particular day, we were told to leave him alone. He was sitting quietly in a corner, speaking in a low voice to my father. And we had to obey my mother's commands not to bother Barney. He was waiting for that phone call from Pease Air Force Base. And so he told my father told me later about clearly observing these non-humans on the craft and describing what he could remember, but that he had been so distressed over what he saw, he had developed a mental block.
Did
And
Barney
that's
did Barney ever talk about ETs up until this moment?
no, he
It wasn't
never
part
had.
of your conversation. Your aunt didn't talk about it.
No,
It's not something you talked about.
not something the family talked about. We were a political family. My grandfather was a selectman in the town of Kingston, New Hampshire. He at one time had been the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, which is sort of like the mayor, only this was a small town of about 5,000 people. He was an elected police officer. My grandmother had marched for the women's right to vote. She was a union organizer. That kind of thing. So they were quite politically active and farmers.
So Betty and Barney were outed. They didn't want to come out. They wanted to keep this a secret. And Betty confided in a friend, and the friend outed her out to a reporter or an investigative journalist.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you're in high school, and all of a sudden your aunt and uncle become famous. And what does that do for your reputation in high school?
Well, this happened in 1965 when John Luttrell published his articles in the Boston Traveler. So it was in late October 1965. And so I was a senior in high school, I think. Yes, I was a senior in high school. And the classmates just seemed interested in the school. I think it was the legacy, what I would become. They thought that I would be one of the first astronauts, that sort of thing.
So interesting.
Yeah, I wasn't teased or anything like that because I was a class officer. I was on the student council.
You were very popular. Weren't you homecoming queen like 50 times?
That was in elementary school. I was the Valentine's queen so many times that the teacher would not permit me to run for that any longer. And then I was later, when I was in junior high, I was queen of something else, but not in high school.
Yeah. So, okay. And so here's a picture of you graduating high school, and there's a photographer there. Where is that photographer from?
That photographer was from Look magazine. And John Fuller was writing The Interrupted Journey, the first book that was ever written about Betty and Barney's event. Mm-hmm. And this is Paul Fusco, who attended my high school graduation to take photographs of the family for 2 Look magazine articles that John Fuller was publishing to promote the book, The Interrupted Journey. So he took a lot of photographs of my high school graduation and the party after.
Yeah, did you feel like a star?
Not really.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like a star. I was disappointed because I couldn't spend time with my friends. You know, when you're graduating from high school, you want to have your friends to the party. You want to do things with friends. But for that weekend, it was family only. And,
because of the magazine?
Yes, because of the magazine. So I, as a teenager, not fully realizing the significance, I suppose, of what was happening, I was disappointed. And my parents said, sorry, you have to do it.
Yeah.
So that's what happened.
This actually brings up the question, I've never really asked you this, but growing up, was there any resentment from your part, maybe as a little girl, as to why this happened to your family?
When I was 17, I wasn't a little girl, but when I was 17, and my aunt was doing confidential experiments with a team of scientists from IBM to try to call in craft that they could observe. There was craft that landed on my grandparents' farm. And at least one of those times I was taken, and I had conscious recall of being taken to that craft, finding myself on that craft with these non-human entities standing around me. And I was terrified. And it changed my life. And yes, there was resentment over that. I was having the kind of reaction that Barney had, of just being extraordinarily distressed, not being able to sleep at night out of fear.
I love this picture of you in college. So you graduated high school and went on to college. Where did you go and what did you study?
Okay, I went to the University of New Hampshire, and I had intended to go to medical school. That's what I wanted to do, pre-med. But by the time I arrived in college, I was more interested in boys than in studying so much, because the pre-med curriculum, Seb, I think you took it.
Yeah.
A lot of chemistry and that kind of thing. So I ended up beginning in English literature and thinking that I wanted to become a journalist or an author. And my Aunt Betty said, "Oh, Kathy, don't do that. Major in something that's practical." She said, "Major in social work." It was called social service. And Betty had gotten her degree from UNH, and she was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire in adoption and child welfare, and she absolutely loved it. So I said, okay, well, I'll try that. But I decided that I did not want to be the kind of social worker that she was. I wanted to go into what they then called psychiatric social work, clinical social work today. And so I was traveling up to the psychiatric hospital in Concord, New Hampshire. It was either once or twice a week as part of a psychology class, and just volunteering my time with some other students up there. I liked that a lot. And I had intended to go to graduate school, and I wanted to study clinical social work. So after I graduated from college, I got married. And so in those days, it was, I had to support my husband by going to work while he earned his doctorate in the philosophy of psychiatry. So here I was looking for a job. I'm no longer in New Hampshire. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, going from basically the farming community to the huge city. And I applied to work at the psychiatric hospital near the campus, just almost across the street from the campus. And they wouldn't hire me. Here, my little 4'11" blonde girl off the farm. They thought I would be harmed. So I had to look for something else. So someone told me, well, if you volunteer for Ralph Nader, then maybe you can find a job doing something. So I said, okay. I went over and I volunteered for Ralph Nader. And while I was volunteering there, within a couple of weeks, I found a job. And, I was desperate. I had to support us. My former husband had a teaching assistantship and had some money coming in, but it was going to take my income too. So it was a job in the inner city. And I liked it because it was teaching little children. And being 4'11", I did not want to teach teenagers in the inner city. So that was the position I took. And I started attending graduate courses first in education, studying that line of work while I was teaching. But then my husband and I had an agreement that when he earned his master's degree, I would be able to go and start to begin working toward my doctorate. So I had applied to graduate school in school psychology, and I was accepted for that. I had a full scholarship for that. And then everything fell apart in my marriage. He told me I couldn't go because I still needed to work, but I had already left my job. And I was fed up. And I left, and I moved. I'd had a wonderful time in academia. That's what I've always loved most. But it was time to move on. And that's what I did for a number of years. And moved to Colorado and got divorced, ended up getting married again, had a couple of kids, ended up divorced again, back in New Hampshire, teaching. I was teaching. I was an education services coordinator. I was doing graduate work. Everything was moving along very well. I met a wonderful man, much, much better than the first two that I got rid of. And we're still married.
I love Charlie. Charlie's wonderful. Yeah.
He is. And he had 3 sons, so they would come every weekend, and they'd spend summer vacations with us and weekends with us. So I was essentially in a madhouse raising 5 boys while I was teaching and going to graduate school and everything else. It was a little bit too much. I had an unfortunate abduction where I ended up becoming ill and burns, that sort of thing. I was overworked anyway. And so I had to leave my profession and just rest for a long period of time. During that time, I was longing for intellectual stimulation because when I had been teaching, I was writing newspaper articles. I was running, what can I call it? It was a program for disabled children, educationally disabled children. And I was very innovative in creating something new, and received a lot of recognition for that. And I was writing, and then all of a sudden everything was gone, and I was sick. I was having difficulty processing information, neurological problems, physiological problems. I could not walk without a cane. I couldn't remember how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. My 3-year-old son had to teach me how. I remember saying that to him. And he said, "That's all right, Mommy, I'll tell you how." And he was so helpful. And here I was, just very ill. And so I decided, as I started to improve, that I would go back and I would work as a substitute teacher, because I knew that my health was not good enough so that I was able to return to my profession full-time or even part-time on a regular basis. And so I did work as a substitute teacher for a while, and I decided to take up my first love, which was writing, and to join the Mutual UFO Network, to train to become a field investigator. And of course, my Aunt Betty had been my mentor at that time. I was spending a great deal of time with her. Oh, and you see there's Betty and Barney back in 1961 when they were taking that trip, and me when I was 13.
It's so cute. It's so cute. And Betty and Barney, they're very good looking.
Yes, I think they were good looking
Beautifully
people.
dressed and just present themselves in a very classy way.
They
Like
were classy. They were highly intelligent, and very well mannered. Barney was and Betty worked for the Rockingham County Community Action Program, using funding from the U.S. Office of Opportunity to set up that program with a group of people from Rockingham County. Barney received an award because he was chairman of that committee. He was appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission as a member of the State Advisory Committee for the state of New Hampshire. He set up a literacy program through the Archdiocese of Manchester, New Hampshire, so that illiterate people could learn to read. And the reason for that was that you had to take a literacy test in order to vote. And so this would teach people to read so they could vote. And why don't you put up that photograph that you just had up of the group? We were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration on January 20th, 1965, and it was one of the most exciting adventures of my life. Being actively involved in politics as a high school student, I was invited. This, what you see, is my invitation. Betty and Barney received a separate invitation. And here are Betty, and here's Barney. Here I am. This is the New Hampshire delegation. And this is U.S. Senator Tom McIntyre from New Hampshire. So we went to Washington, D.C., and we took part in all of the inaugural activities. We had a tour of the White House. It was just incredible for me. And went to the parties, the balls the night before the inauguration. Wow. And then the parade the next morning, the swearing in of the president, and then the inaugural ball the next night, and parties in between and luncheons. And it was just a wonderful time. We went out to the Arlington National Cemetery and visited John Kennedy's grave site. And the flame was going in it, the eternal flame at that time, I believe. And we stopped, we got out of the car. It was a frigid day. It was so cold. But when we went to get back into the car, Betty and Barney started to talk about how they were in the state of Virginia and how it was illegal for them to be married in the state of Virginia due to the Anti-Miscegenation Act.
While they were married, it was illegal for them to be married.
Yes.
So they were legal in New Hampshire, but illegal in Virginia.
That's correct. And so they started to talk about, oh, what do you think we should do now? Here we are in Virginia and we're married. And so, we went through the discussion of, well, shall Betty and I ride in the back seat and Barney would act as our chauffeur? And that was, no, absolutely not. And then, well, what was next? And what we decided was that Barney would drive, that Betty would sit in the middle right next to him as close as she could get, and that I would sit next to Betty in the front seat, and the three of us in solidarity would drive down the roads of Virginia back to Washington, D.C.
So that made you feel safer, sitting just the three of you together in the front seat. Yeah.
It made me feel powerful. It made me feel that I was making a statement against the idea that marrying someone that you love is wrong simply because their skin color is different. If their ethnic background is different. I grew up in a family with a multi-ethnic family, and we always accepted everyone, regardless of race and religion. We respected people who were good, kind, loving people. We helped people in need. And it seemed so wrong for it to be illegal for a man and a woman who were in love with one another.
And what do you think made him so brave to do that, to get married?
It was Barney who had to be brave, I think, to marry a white woman back in that time frame. But he was in Philadelphia, and he moved to New Hampshire up with Betty. And Betty said, to him, are you sure you're not marrying me for the color of my skin? And I think you should see a psychologist to examine your motives for doing this. And, they realized they had been good friends. They never intended to fall in love, but they did fall in love. And like people who fall in love and want to live together and be together, they married. You'd married in that time frame. You didn't just live together. So they both decided they would marry and that they would campaign for civil rights. And that's what they did. They were very strong people.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And your aunt especially just seems like she was no nonsense.
She was a no-nonsense, down-to-earth person.
Also, if I remember correctly, I think you told me in her later years that she would actually be suspicious of other experiencers.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
They had, I guess she had a high burden of proof. Did she need
you
a
might
lot of
say
evidence?
so.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, she helped. First, let me say she helped many, many experiencers. Debbie Cobble is one, Bud Hopkins, Kathy Davis, Charlie Hickson, Calvin Parker, Travis Walton, and many unnamed individuals. One that I wrote about in the alien abduction files, the Jenny Henderson case, was first Betty's and then became mine. So I knew many experiencers who were friends of Betty's and whom she had supported. But then she had a problem when, dozens and then hundreds of experiencers were being marched before cameras, and there was hypnosis that was being conducted by amateurs. And people were being harmed because these amateur hypnotists knew how to do an induction, but knew nothing about psychology and nothing about ET contact, nothing about ontological shock or trauma or how to work with those individuals. And they were being harmed. And Betty was opposed to that. And she thought that people were being led to believe that they'd had experiences when they had not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a certain level of exploitation going on, still continues to this day. I understand. So she was really concerned about making sure that the portrayal of experiences was done in a very honest and truthful manner. And I guess in the activity and the flurry and the interest of all that, do you think maybe there were some organizations that were trying to find experiencers to exploit on purpose?
Not necessarily, not that I know, but some investigators, individual, and I'm not going to name any names, but some people had their own agendas that they were attempting to prove, and they didn't know a great deal about hypnosis. They had not been trained, and they would lead people to answer a question the way they wanted them to, giving them a choice. Did you do this or did you do that? Did you see this or did you see that? Instead of, doing forensic hypnosis where you don't give those choices, you don't lead at all. And these people, these hypnotists, had no idea how to get to the truth.
I cannot imagine what it would be like if you didn't have ET contact, but someone convinced you that you did. What an absolute mental and spiritual disconnect within you.
Yes. Yeah, that was true. And then some of those who actually had contact simply didn't have a lot of physical evidence. And so they were being scoffed at.
Yeah.
They were being harmed. I mean, it was not a good situation back in the 80s, the early 90s. When John Mack came along, it made a big difference. John Mack, as a psychiatrist, really took a very, very good look at all of this and helped experiencers a great deal.
Yeah, he was kind.
Bud Hopkins did as well.
Yes.
Bud hypnotized me one time. I admired him. I read all of his books. I used to talk to him, and I can't say he was actually my mentor, but he was one of the two people I think that I respect most today, dating back in time. So I'm seeing you're holding up Forbidden Knowledge. That's the
second
before edition. I had it, the second edition before I changed the cover. I don't know if you have the one with the new cover.
Let's see. I have this.
That was the first edition.
I have this in French.
This is the French version of Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted.
You know, Kathy, I did see, you did send me a picture of another cover. Yeah, that's the new cover?
Yes, from the second edition. That second edition cover was confusing. People didn't realize it was a new edition with new information.
Oh.
So I changed the cover.
Okay, I liked the cover. In your introduction, I had said that you used to be a nuts and bolts investigator.
I was.
And here you have on the cover of this edition, Forbidden Knowledge, a personal journey from alien abduction to spiritual transformation. So can you speak a little bit about how you transformed from nuts and bolts into this more esoteric version of how you see ET contact?
Well, it took many, many years, but back when I began, really doing this very seriously, studying under my aunt during the 1980s, and then joining the Mutual UFO Network, it was entirely a nuts and bolts organization. And you had to give case disposition based upon the evidence. And if somebody did not present evidence, then you could not state that anything had occurred. So, we did not really have an investigative team for ET contact at all. It was just regular field investigators who were used to doing lights in the sky investigations. And all of a sudden you have people who might make a report, they're traumatized, and these individuals might have had a military background or a police background where they were used to interrogating people, and it was not a good system. Let me put it that way. But I remained nuts and bolts for a long time. When Jacques Vallée came out with his book, maybe it was Dimensions, he talked about how craft would like simply disappear, would fade out, and in the sky. And as a nuts and bolts researcher, an investigator, I was thinking, oh, it just flew away so quickly that it looked like it disappeared. I could not think in terms of the interdimensional aspects, in terms of cloaking, in terms of extraterrestrials who might be fifth and sixth dimensionals and not living in a three-dimensional world. I was thinking that these crafts were leaving the planet in their star system and just flying these great distances, maybe using nuclear power, maybe over generations, and finally arriving on our planet. And I had no idea early on, I don't think any of us did, about the different types of contact and the different types of entities that people encounter and the various reports. I mean, all of that comes along with your investigation, with your research. And finally, as time passed, I began to hear reports about things like light orbs in people's homes and poltergeist activity. And that was something that MUFON certainly didn't look at. That was in the paranormal category. So then the question was, well, is all of this just paranormal and these people are seeing ghosts, but they think they're ETs? So it was a lot of processing. And then I learned, no, that's not the case, because I worked on 3 major studies, and 2 of those studies were with PhD academics. And about 5,000 experiencers in all. And statistically, we realized that a highly significant percentage of these contactees or abductees, experiencers, whatever you want to call them, were having contact with these intelligent orbs that were coming into their homes. I even have a video of it, an orb that healed one of the experiencers whose case I investigated from cancer, and the medical report of that. I was receiving reports about the feeling that something unseen was walking on the experiencer's bed when the experiencer was wide awake. And I was thinking, cat ghost? So I don't know. I've never had a cat, they'd say. And finally,
they do exist, cat ghosts. I've had that. Yeah.
Finally, I put all of this together, and I was able, it was very difficult to think about what lies outside our human visual ability. We have a very limited vision. Our pets can see more than we can see. And then to think in terms of other dimensions as well. And so a lot to learn, about physics, studies of the paranormal, studies of the psychic ability, the meta-analyses of various psychic experiments at universities, especially Duke University. There's been a great deal of work done, and I came slowly to comprehend what this was really all about, and realized that those orbs that we were seeing in my childhood home, and the time that I was sleeping in my mother's bed with my husband at the time, and we felt what we thought was the cat walking on the bed. We were going to throw it out of her bedroom, and she was in a different room, of course. And we felt around for it. We couldn't find it. We turned on the light. It was still walking on the bed. We couldn't see it. We looked in closets, under the bed, everywhere. No cat. And then we mentioned it to my mother the next morning, and she said, "Oh, I meant to tell you about that." So it was these personal experiences I was having, combined with all of this investigation, all of this research, and speaking with hundreds, if not thousands, of experiencers. Everything combined that took me along the path to where people now think that I'm really a kook. Some people.
What? I don't think so.
Well, the nuts and bolts people do.
Excuse me, but you have such a reputation.
I do, yes.
Yeah, so it's not a kooky reputation.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I think even the nuts and bolts people respect you.
It's a scientific reputation.
It went by, yes, and that's important to have. So you have a reputation on both sides, the scientific side and also the metaphysical side.
Yes.
All right, this went by really fast. Can you just let people know how they can get a hold of you, and if you have any new projects coming up, please?
Yes, you can get a hold of me by going to my website at kathleen-marden.com, and you can purchase autographed copies of my books and my comparative analysis of the hypnosis tapes, where you listen to Betty and Barney's hypnosis tapes, by going to my website. Also, Dr. Melanie Barton-Bragg and I are doing a survey, and we would really appreciate it if you would take part in it. If you haven't already done so, your identity will remain confidential. We'll use only the statistical information and perhaps some other information that we receive, but no names, no addresses. So it's the Marden-Barton survey on religious belief and extraterrestrial life. You don't have to be an experiencer. You don't even have to believe that UFOs are real. So anyone can participate.
Yeah, please take it. Thank you, Kathy, with all my heart. And thank you, everyone who joined us. We're very grateful.
It was such a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.